What is theology? What is this course about? I could have done all this the first day, but it would have been completely abstract and dry. This way it's only partially abstract and dry. What's theology? I'm going to start with a definition by Stan Grenz, who's a theologian. He died about a decade ago. He was a friend, a Baptist theologian, who defines theology this way in his book. He says it's systematic reflection on and articulation of the fundamental beliefs that we share as followers of Jesus Christ. All right? That's a working definition of Christian theology. And the question I have for you is, what connotations does that definition bring to your mind? Dry? Abstract? Books, facts? Maybe I'm reading into it, but those are the connotations I had in my mind when I first signed up for a course like this. Let me work around to maybe a fuller understanding with a different set of connotations by looking at what other fields are. Let's look at some dictionary definitions. What's music? You're going to like this. This is Webster's definition of music. The science or art of ordering tones or sounds in succession, in combination, and in temporal relationships. Doesn't that sound fabulous? To produce a composition having unity and continuity. That's what music is by a dictionary definition. And you know, it's a good definition, isn't it? But does it make you want to be a music major? If you say yes, then we'll talk. What's kinesiology? Kinesiology is, again, Webster's definition, the study of the principles of mechanics and anatomy in relation to human movement. Any kines majors? Does that ring true? Have you already learned a definition like this? Did it get you really stoked? Not so much. Medicine. What's the definition of medicine? It's the science and art dealing with the maintenance of health and the prevention, alleviation, or cure of disease. I like how it's the science and art, dealing principally with health and disease. And to top them all, a definition of basketball. Let's say you have a friend from, I don't know, some other planet who's never heard of basketball, and they ask you what it is. Well, if you go to the dictionary, here's what you can say. It's not going to produce an intense desire to go get Lakers season tickets. A usually indoor court game between two teams of usually 5 players each who score by tossing an inflated ball through a raised goal. Did you feel a disconnect between the tradition of basketball, medicine, kinesiology, music? Did you feel a disconnect between that and the definition? Yeah, right? Did you feel a disconnect between the definition of theology and the reality of theology? I'm guessing not so much. And that's a problem. Because it means that the connotations can rule our expectations for what a course like this is about in a way that wouldn't rule. I mean, if your basketball coach reads you this definition of basketball, y'all are going to have a good laugh and then get out in the court and practice. You're not going to think, you know, basketball isn't what I thought it was. I'm out. Are these activities, music, medicine, basketball, are these best articulated in definitions? How are they best articulated if not definitions? What do you think? Yeah? In experience. And what kind of experiences? So at a game, in a lab, in a concert, or maybe in chapel singing, where you're not just listening, you're singing. Yeah, participation is key. consider terms that relate to these. You could think on the side of what relevance these things are to all of these different fields. Shared practices. Are shared practices relevant to all of these things? To basketball? To medicine? To music? To kinesiology? How about social roles? Coaches, conductors, teachers, practitioners. Paradigms. All right, conceptual frameworks. Authorities. Do you have authorities in all these fields? And now include Christian theology, not just the ones in the second list, but include Christian theology. What role do authorities play in these fields? You're not going to find a field without them. In fact, not just on the list here, you're not going to find any field without them. Or commitments, personal commitments. Or acquired skills. Or jargon, technical terms. Maybe the ones in basketball don't come from Latin and Greek, but they're there, and you can't get very far without them, can you? Or history, historical development. Every one of these fields has a history, an extremely interesting history. Michael Jordan changed how basketball's played. Which meant there were, and there are, contesting notions of how best to do that sport, as there are contesting visions of how to practice medicine. Now, we don't get relativistic, do we, and say, well, I guess it's all in your own mind what makes good medicine and bad medicine. We really can't talk about whether medicine is true or false or good or bad because there's differences of opinion. We know that's not true. And what about the role of expertise? Can you identify the role of expertise in all of these? Yeah, right? These might at first look like radically different things. And you know, they are, in one sense. They are all distinct. In fact, they're all unique. And yet, they all have these common features and more. This is Polanyi's insight. They don't play by fundamentally different epistemological rules. They play by fundamentally similar rules. These traditions are they're organic living things. They are human projects that have histories and futures. And participants shape them. Theology is not some static thing that sits on a shelf. Theology is a living tradition that you have become a part of, whatever your role, whether you're a believer or not, just by encountering it and interacting with it. Okay, traditions are, another philosopher describes them, forms of life. We live traditions. You live politics, or you live kinesiology, or you live theology. And we live through them. They are how we live. They're indispensable. That's why you need to major in something. You major in something to get deep enough in a field to understand its fundamental logic and its fundamental practices. And majors aren't interchangeable because those practices are different. But we don't really care which major you major in because they're common enough that becoming relatively an expert in one field will give you insight into how all the fields work and how they interrelate. Being a major is not about which job you're going to take after you graduate. Even if you try to make it, reality is too complicated. Being a major is learning how to think. And learning how to think means learning how to think in a tradition. And the Christian tradition is a way to think and live. The jargon of basketball arises from the game of basketball. Those words didn't exist until people needed to use them to describe the things they were doing. A field goal, an assist, a pick, whatever. Christian tradition, including theological tradition, isn't just an abstracted definition or a dry concept that sits in a book waiting to be memorized and repeated on a test and then dispensed with. Any more than you would treat the terminology of any other field that way. Christian tradition is a life, okay? Christianity isn't a feeling, and Christianity isn't a concept. Christianity is a life that involves its own distinct practices, goals, participants, roles, commitments, resources, and its own expertise. And that's what I'm hoping this course does. I hope it moves you in the direction of becoming an expert. The word expert is related to the word experience, experimentation. All right? You live long enough in this stuff and you become an expert. Put in your 10,000 hours and your life will be shaped by this thing. We can become experts in this tradition. And what the domain of this tradition is, it is uniquely pertaining to the kingdom of God, to that which Jesus announced and brought about and established. All right? Biology is about life, music's about sound. Christianity is about the kingdom of God. So, go back to that definition from Stan Grenz. Systematic reflection on and articulation of the fundamental beliefs we share as followers of Jesus Christ. When I first meet that line, my mind kind of locks onto systematic reflection, articulation, beliefs. And I kind of put it into the world of a bunch of ideas about something that may or may not be real. But listen to the last half of this definition. I think that's where Grenz gets it. Reflection on beliefs we share as followers of Jesus. We're in the middle of the doctrine of incarnation because this is about Jesus, the King, and his kingdom. We're about to explore discipleship because following Jesus is what Jesus asks of those who would know him. If you want to be an expert in this field, you have to follow this coach. It's just indispensable. And we follow together. We share discipleship. That will take us to the doctrine of the church. The things that we are studying this semester arise right out of the life Jesus gave us in the kingdom of God. And theology is shaped around the articulation and the exploration and the deepening of that life. All right? Now is it a little more exciting? I hope it gets a little more exciting.